In Chapter 1 of Ursula K. Leguin's sixth and final Earthsea novel, The Other Wind, Alder has sought out Ged, or Sparrowhawk, the former Archmage, on Gaunt, and he's having terrible dreams in which he is coming to the borderland between life and death in the Earthsea universe, and he's told Ged part of the story, and now the story gets more complicated when Ged asks him, "Tell me how it was when you came to Roke." Roke, the isle where the high arts of magic are taught. Roke, the place that has the imminent grove whose roots reach down to the very bottom of the earth. Roke, the isle of magic, magery, and wisdom. And so Alder tells this story. He leaves the ship at the dock at Thwill Town, and the sailors draw the rune of the closed door to prevent him ever from coming back on board because they're afraid of him. And he's looking for the great school there. And Thwill is kind of a weird town, He can see the school, but he can never quite get there. Finally, he comes to a door, and he recognized that the wall is the one that he was trying to get to. He knocks, and a man with a quiet face and quiet eyes opens the door. Alder was ready to say that he'd been sent by the wizard Beryl of Ea with a message for the Master Summoner, but he didn't have a chance to speak. The doorkeeper gazed at him for a moment and said mildly, "You cannot bring them into this house, friend." And that tells a lot right there. He calls him friend, but he says, "You can't bring them with you." Who are the you, or the them? Alder did not ask who it was he could not bring. He knew. He'd slept scarcely all the past nights, snatching fragments of sleep, waking in terror, dozing off in the daylight. And waking, the dream was in him, with him, around him, veiled, and he could hear, always faintly through all the noises of wind and sea, the voices that cried his name. He did not know now if he was awake or asleep. He was crazy with pain and fear and weariness. And he tells the doorkeeper, "Keep them out and let me in. For pity's sake, let me in." And the doorkeeper does. He lets him in. And Alder, is basically entirely cashed out. The summoner appears and tries to hold a conversation with Alder, and he's not really up to it. And what we find is that the summoner is going to enter into his dreams. All right? The master summoner came. Alder was not able to talk. And then as he remembered, the sunlit room was altogether gone. He was on the gray hill, but with him stood the summoner of Roke, a big, broad, dark-skinned man with a great staff of yew wood that shimmered in the dark place. The voices had ceased calling. The people, the crowding figures at the wall were gone. He could hear a distant rustle and a kind of sobbing as they went down into the darkness. The summoner stepped to the wall, and here we find out something really important. He put his hands on the wall. The stones had been loosened here and there. A few lay fallen on the dry grass. Alder felt he should pick them up and replace them, mend the wall, but he did not. The summoner says, "Who brought you here?" And Alder says, "My wife, Mev, summoner here." Alder stood dumb. At last he opened his mouth, but it was not his wife's true name that he spoke, her use name instead, Lily. And then she doesn't come. The summoner summons her with her name, and Alder felt the breath go out of him. There was some movement, something lighter coming up the hill. Alder shook with fear and yearning and whispered, "Oh, my dear love." But it's not Lily or Maeve who's coming. Instead, it's a child of 12 or so. It paid no heed to him or the summoner, never looked across the wall, but just settled down under it. When Alder came closer and looked, he saw the child was prying and pulling at the stones, trying to loosen one, then another. The summoner tries to speak to the child in the old speech. The child glanced up indifferently and went on tugging at the stones with its thin fingers that seemed to have no strength in them. This is so horrible to Alder. His head spun. He tried to turn away, and beyond that, he could remember nothing till he woke up in the sunny room. So this is the first, you might say, guided attempt to make sense out of what is happening to him. The summoner of Roke, one of the most powerful magic users in the entire Earthsea universe, is not able to actually make any progress with the child or in calling Lily. The next thing we see happening is the doorkeeper is joined by the master herbal and the master summoner. And the herbal is able to heal Alder to some degree. He wakes up, and the master herbal was there with the tepid, insipid tea and the earth-smelling smoke, the dull, untuneful chant, and the touch of his hand, and Alder could have rest. And on the fourth morning, the three masters, the herbal, the doorkeeper, and summoner, came to his room. Alder bowed to the summoner with dread, almost distrust in his heart. The herbal was a great mage, but his art was not altogether different from Alder's own craft of mending, so that they had a kind of understanding. The summoner, though, dealt with not with bodily things, but with the spirit, with the minds and wills of men, with ghosts, with meanings. His art was arcane, dangerous, full of risk and threat. And he had stood beside Alder there, not in the body, on the boundary, at the wall. With him, the darkness and the fear returned. The doorkeeper, however, is a kind of benign figure. And what do? They explain things to him. They question him. They deliberate about what is to be done. What we find out is the summoner tells Alder about the nature of the wall and about the previous summoner, Thorion, who had crossed the wall looking for Ged and Lebanon, and then was bid to come back, and came back, but as he says, what came back was only his skill, his power, his ambition, the will to live that gives no life. We trusted him because we had loved him, so he devoured us until Irion destroyed him. As they go on, he says, the two masters had been silent for a while after the herbal spoke about Thorion. Alder got up the courage to ask him about a matter that had been much on his mind, how those who died came to the wall and how the mages came there. And the summoner says it's a spirit journey. The old healer says it's not in the body we cross the wall. If a mage goes there in vision, his sleeping body is here. We call what makes that journey from the body the soul, the spirit. And then they deliberate, because Alder says, but my wife took my hand. I felt her touch. And the summoner says, so it seemed to you. But the herbalist says, if they touched bodily, a link was made. Might that not be why the other dead can come to him, call to him, even touch him? And the summoner says, that is why he must resist them. And Alder says, I try to resist them. There's so many of them, and she's with them, and they're suffering, crying out to me. The summoner says, they cannot suffer. Death ends all suffering. And the herbal says, maybe the shadow of pain is pain. There are mountains in that land, and they are called pain. So there's a very interesting set of discussions, is it not? We have the summoner saying this is all symbolic, this is all in the spiritual, and the herbal saying, well, we got to be a bit more careful with this. Maybe it's not quite so cut and dried as you're saying, summoner. Maybe there's something more going on with this. And the doorkeeper brings up another consideration. Alder's a mender, not a breaker. I don't think he can break that link. And the summoner says, if he made it, he can break it. Again, the logic of this stuff. And then the question is, did he make it? And Alder says, I don't have any such art. And so the summoner says, then I must go down among them. And the doorkeeper says, no, my friend. And the old herbal said, you last of all. So they decide Alder will be their guide, and they will, all three of them, go with him to this land. They go there, and there's this really interesting description. The others were with him, the herbal a warm presence in the chill, the doorkeeper elusive and silvery as starlight, and the massive summoner a bare, dark strength. They go to the wall, and Hara, the summoner's deep voice, called him back like a noose around his neck, a jerked leash. He staggered, stumbled forward one step more, almost at the wall, dropped to his knees and reached out to the stone. He was crying, save me! But to whom? To the mages or to the shadows on the wall? Then hands were on his shoulders, living hands, strong and warm, and he was in his room. And there were 4 men in the room with him, not 3. The 4th man is, as he says, a far northerner. His eyes were the color of ice. His hair and skin were white. And this man says to the mages, what are you doing, my friends? And the herbal says, taking risks, Osver, "Trouble at the border, Patterner," said the summoner. And the Patterner says, "Let him come to me. He'll be safe in the grove. He won't be bothered by all these things there." And so he goes to the grove, and there he's actually able to sleep without having these dreams. And he says, "As soon as I came there, I knew I could sleep. I felt as if I'd been asleep all along in an evil dream, and now here I was truly awake, so I could truly sleep. I slept, and I cannot tell you the sweetness of it." Then, interestingly enough, what do we find? The Patterner actually tells him, "You should go and talk to Sparrowhawk, the Archmage, the former Archmage, the one that we know as Ged." Why? Because he has the most experience with this wall in the land of the dead. I mean, he spent a lot of time there compared to the rest of us. So he seeks out Ged in Gaunt. And Ged himself, although he's no longer like a member of the Council of the Wise at Roke, he's got some very interesting things to say. Here's what he says. "When I lived on Roke, I might have seen things as the summoner does. There I knew no power stronger than what we call magery, not even the old powers of the earth. But if the summoner is the man that I think, he came as a boy to Roke. My old friend Vetch of Ifish sent him to study with us, and he never left." That's the difference between him and Osver the Patterner. Osver lived till he was grown as a warrior's son, a warrior himself, among men and women in the thick of life. Matters the walls of the school keep out, he knows in his flesh and blood. He knows what is so important, what has been left out, that men and women love, make love, marry. Having lived these 15 years outside the walls, I incline to think Osver might be on the better track. The bond between you and your wife is stronger than the division between life and death. And then Alder says, "I've thought it might be so, but it seems shameless to think it." Prideful, right? "We loved each other more than I can say we loved each other. But was our love greater than any other before us? Was it greater than Morid and Elpharon's? These legendary lovers from way back in the tales of Earthsea. Elpharon, who Ged himself summoned as a spirit of the dead and looked upon for a brief moment." Here's where Ged says something really quite interesting. He says, "Well, sometimes there's a passion that comes in its springtime to ill fate or death, and because it ends in its beauty, it's what the harpers sing of and the poets make stories of. The love that escapes the years. That was the love of the young king and Elpharon. That was your love, Hara." And here's where it gets very insightful. "It wasn't greater than Morid's, but was his greater than yours? There's no less or greater in an absolute thing. All or nothing at all, the true lover says, and that's the truth of it. My love will never die," he says. He claims eternity. And rightly, how can it die when it's life itself? What do we know of eternity but the glimpse we get of it when we enter into that bond? Love, in some respects, is greater than life itself, and greater than the division between life and death. He goes on and says, "Every farm boy sings that, every young girl that dreams of love knows it, but it's not a thing that the masters of Roke are familiar with. The Patterner maybe knew it early. I knew it late." Ged is talking about his own love with Tenar over this time. "Very late, not quite too late. You had that." Alder says, "I did." And then he says, "Maybe they're there together in the dark land, Morid and Elpharon." And Sparrowhawk says, "No, there are no lovers there." And here we come to the other great insight that Ged shares. He tells Alder that some great changes have come because, in the land of the dead, lovers pass each other by, but his wife came to him, called his name, and kissed his mouth. And he says, "And since your love wasn't greater than any other mortal love, and since you and she aren't mighty wizards whose power might change the laws of life and death, something else is in this. Something is happening, is changing. Though it happens to you and to you, through you and to you. You are its instrument and not its cause. So he goes on and he says, when my master Ihil died, my wife was here with him, and as he was dying, he said to her, "It is changed, all changed." He was looking across that wall, from which side I do not know, and since that time there have indeed been changes. A king on Morad's throne, no archmage of Roke. More than that, I saw a child summon the dragon, Khalesin the eldest, and Khalesin came to her, calling her daughter as I do. What does that mean? What does it mean that dragons have been seen above the islands of the west? So there's great changes going on, and these dreams signify more than what they're being taken as, just this threat, which is how the masters of Roke are interpreting it. So there's a lot going on here, and the most, you might say, insightful, wise people of the realm are trying to make sense out of what is going on through this man Alder.